Right, welcome to Bellevue Baptist Church. It's great to have you this morning. Let's all stand. Song number 213, Holy, Holy, Holy. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Early in the morning our song shall rise to thee. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. Holy, 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 all the saints adore thee, casting down their golden crowns around the glassy sea. Cherubim and seraphim falling down before thee, who wert and art and evermore shall be. Holy, 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 though the darkness hide thee, though the eye of sinful men thy glory may not see, only thou art holy, there is none beside thee, perfect in power, in love and purity. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, all thy works shall praise thy name in earth and sky and sea. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. Great singing. You may be seated. Like I said, welcome to Bellevue Baptist Church. It's great to have you this morning. Pastor's out of town for the next couple weeks, so if you're a visitor here this morning, we'd love to have you again when Pastor's in town. But we have a wonderful guest speaker this morning. It's always a pleasure to hear him speak, and it's been really good. This morning was really good. The Sunday school hour has been, or growth class hour has been really good, and I'm excited to hear him again. Brother Caleb Mckenzie, when you come up, if you could just introduce yourself and your family. But let's open up in a word of prayer. Brother Buckeye, would you lead us in a word of prayer this morning?
Heavenly Father, we're already thankful, Lord, for being able to hear from your word today. Thank you, God, for the opportunity. Thanks for letting us be able to meet here. And we just look forward, God, to the rest of the day. We ask your blessing upon it. We ask your blessing upon Pastor Joel and his family. Some of them are away. We just pray that they would have a good, refreshing time. And you take care of them, bring them back safely. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. Announcements. I'm not sure what announcements there are for the main service, but as the youth leader, I'll talk about the teenage announcements that we have coming up. Got a couple things. On April 24th, we have an activity. The plan was to have it at my house, but I don't have the house yet. Still waiting. So we're going to have to readjust some things. It's 2 weeks away. At this point, I don't think I'll be moved in 2 weeks. So we'll talk about tonight with the teenagers. We'll talk about what to do. Maybe we'll go ice skating or something. I know that was one of the things they wanted to do, but we'll figure it out tonight. But that's coming up on April 24th, and then May 28th. So I think from the 27th to the 29th is what we'll do. But the main event is on the 28th, the Silverwood Youth Rally. So for the kids, Silverwood is a theme park. It's the largest theme park in the Pacific Northwest. And Woodin Valley is a church in Bothell. They rent it out every year, rent out the whole theme park. And they have all the churches in the area come, and it's awesome. It goes from, who's been to a theme park? Everyone's been, most people have been to a theme park. Not everybody. But when you go to a theme park, I don't, if you go there on a normal day, you go and you stand in line and you wait for like 2 hours to ride a ride that you get to enjoy for like 2 minutes, right? And I don't know about you, when I was a kid, that was terrible to me. That was like, I enjoy the thrill of the ride, and I try and make it as dangerous as possible because it's not a thrill unless you're gonna die, right? So I'll take my seatbelt off and stand up, and that was always so much fun. But waiting 2 hours to do that for 2 minutes is just not worth it, right? So this thing we do every year for Silverwood, we rent out the whole theme park. There's no lines. If you want to ride the ride, you just ride, and then you do it again, and you do it again, right? As many times as you want. It's amazing. So that's coming up, and it's awesome. So we're going to go. I know some of the kids here have gone in the past and had a pretty terrible experience with the hotel and a really bad part of town. So we're not going to do that. We're going to get an Airbnb. We're going to do it right. It's just our small group. We're going to have a lot of fun. So plan it. Put it on your calendars. Come to that. It'll be fun. All right. Let's stand again. Song number 625. Song number 625. Faith is the victory. Let's sing it out. Encamped along the hills of light, ye Christian soldiers rise, and embrace the battle ere the night shall veil the glowing skies. Against the foe in veils below, let all our strength be hurled. That overcomes the world. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. His banner over us is love, our sword, the word of God. We tread the road the saints above with shouts of triumph trod. By faith they like a whirlwind's breath swept on o'er every field. The faith by which they conquer death is still our shining shield. Faith is a victory. Faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. On every hand the foe we find drawn up in dread array. Let tents of ease be left behind, and onward to the fray. Salvation's helmet on each head, with truth all girt about. The earth shall tremble neath our tread, and echo with our shout. Faith is a victory. Faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. To him that overcomes the foe, my great gift shall we give. Before the angels he shall know his name confessed in heaven. Then onward from the hills of light, our hearts with love aflame, will vanquish all the hosts of night in Jesus' conquering name. Faith is a victory. Faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. Great singing. Do we have one more verse? Oh, okay. Great singing. All right. Let's have the offering. You can all be seated. right. Thank you, Tati. Let's all stand again. Song number 589. Song number 589. What a friend we have in Jesus. Sweet Hour of Prayer, song number 588. Man, that song is so good. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you're stressed out about something, and you're like, man, this is killing me. I don't know what I'm going to do. And you start fretting, and you could just take it to God in prayer, and he takes care of it. You know, it's been such, growing up, I had a mom and a dad who loved God and served him and had this faith that God would take care of things, and he always did. And I grew up witnessing that all the time, like just no security for the future other than, yeah, God will take care of it, right? And he always did take care of it. And then in my life, you would think, I grew up, I know God will take care of it, but somehow that just goes out of my mind, and I just start freaking out about stuff, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how this is going to work. And I could just take it to God in prayer. It's so good. Sweet Hour of Prayer, let's sing it out. On that first verse,
Father's throne, may God
Mckenzie, if you could come on up, introduce your family to us, and lead us to the main service. Kids can be dismissed to junior church.
I was thinking, so I guess I'll start with introductions so I won't forget to do that. So I am Caleb Mckenzie. I'm the associate pastor of Bible Baptist Church in Puyallup. Been, I don't remember now, associate pastor there for almost 13 years. Been the youth pastor there. This summer will be 15 years that I've been working with the teens there. My wife, Lisa, when you said introduce my family, she said, please don't make us stand. So my wife, Lisa, who I won't ask to stand, but my kids get no choice. So my son, Josh, stand up, Josh. My daughter, Kaylee, and then my youngest went out with junior church, Zach, is out there with the kids. Singing, though, you're giving the announcements to the teens. I could not let my teens talk to you because they would get jealous. You talked about, we don't have a house, so we'll talk about what we're going to do. Our teens for years have tried to, give suggestions, and I can't tell you how many times, we should vote on what an activity is, and I tell them, look, this is a dictatorship in here. I'm not asking requests. This is just what we're doing. So you're way nicer than I am. The teens that get you should be thrilled about that because you're a lot nicer than I am. Genesis chapter 37. I don't know if you guys typically do this, but once you find your place, if you're able to stand this morning, I'll ask you to do that. Just Genesis 37. I'm going to start reading in verse 13. I'll give you a moment to find your place. Genesis 37. Starting in verse 13, we're going to read more than likely down to 28. I might wind up stopping a little early, but 13 through verse 28, it says, And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, Here am I. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And he asked him, and the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flock. And the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren, and found them in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, Shed no innocent blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness. This is the super nice older brother. Let's not kill him. We'll just throw him in a pit in the wilderness. It'll be fine. Lay no hand upon him, that he may be rid of him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. It came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content, and there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. And we'll stop there for now. I'll warn you now, we're going to be looking at a few different passages in here, Genesis 37 to I believe 39, kind of looking at a few of those to get the context today. But we'll stop there for now. Let's have a word of prayer, and then you can be seated. Lord, I want to thank you again for the opportunity we have to look in your word, the opportunity we have to be able to hear from you. I pray that you will use me this morning, Lord. Help me to be your vessel. Help this to be the message that you know that we need today, Lord. I pray this in your name. Amen. You can go ahead and be seated. The life of Joseph is really one you could preach so easily. You could preach a series out of just the life of Joseph. So many different things that we could see, even in just the little section that we read to start us off this morning. The title, you see it up on the screen, The Choices of Joseph. Right now in our church, I've been preaching a Wednesday night series on You Have a Choice. And kind of the concept that I've had in this entire series has been that we make choices constantly. Everything from little choices to major choices that we make constantly. You know, the choice to get out of bed in the morning, the choice, the choice of how many cups of coffee to have, not whether or not you'll have coffee, but how many cups of coffee you're going to have before you head off to work. And we have all of these choices that we make that are little things, and we have choices that we make that are major things, and the same carries over into our spiritual life. Things like what we talked about in growth class this morning with your outlook. Hey, that's a choice that you make. How you view things, that's a choice that you make. How this series kind of got started was for our kids isn't the right way to put it, is because of our kids. It's that phrase, you have a choice, is something my kids dread. They have hated this Wednesday night series that I've been doing because I say that a bunch. And we have said that. My wife actually was the one who started it for years to our kids. The kids, something happens and they start to get an attitude, and she's like, now you have a choice how you're going to handle this. And it's true. That we have a choice on how we're going to respond to things, and we have a choice what our attitude is going to be, and we have a choice in a lot of those things. So it's got, because I'm doing this series right now, it has my mind kind of noticing choices as I read my Bible, noticing the importance that happens because of some of the choices that are made. So that's what I want us to look at this morning in the life of Joseph. You look at his life. Joseph's life was a roller coaster ride. Joseph, he starts out on kind of the high. You're talking about the theme park, so we'll use the roller coaster ride. He starts out on the high part of this thing. He starts out as the favorite child of the favorite wife. Things are good. The Bible makes it clear that his dad played some major favorites, didn't try to hide it at all. He was loved by his dad more than any of his brothers, given special treatment, special gifts. We know of the coat of many colors where we read his brothers took that coat from him that he was wearing that day. I'm sure the coat of many colors, the whole point of it was to show this is my favorite son. So you have to think that every time Joseph wore that coat, that it's a slap in the face of his brothers every single time. Every time he puts that on, it's a reminder, oh yeah, there's Dad's favorite again. Every time they saw Joseph with it, it would have been an insult, a reminder that he's the favorite. They hated him for it. And I don't think really, if we're honest, I don't think we can blame them too much for that. But Joseph starts out on this high of life, that he's on the mountaintop. Things are great. Favorite son getting special treatment. But his life also takes some really major lows. That hatred that his brothers had for him grows, which is a side note and not the focus of the message, but I think well worth pointing out as we kind of go through introduction here. Hatred always grows. Always. If you allow a seed of hatred to sit in your heart, it will every time grow out of control. Every single time. You may not act out like his brothers did, but it'll grow and mess you up. And I'm pretty sure the first time his brothers despised him, I don't think they at any point when they first got upset that, boy, he's the favorite son, I don't think they thought, hey, someday we're going to carry him, or we're going to conspire to kill him. Or I don't think they at any point thought someday we're going to throw him in a pit and sell him as a slave. They never dreamed it'd get that big. But if you allow a seed of hatred to sit in your heart, it's going to grow out of control every single time. That's why learning to forgive is so important because, and we're going to get to this a little bit near the end of the message, but people are always going to do things that upset you. That's not going to change. It's super unique phrase. I have for I don't know how long just said, because people do squirrely things. People do things sometimes that just don't make sense. So I have for years said people are people, and some are more people-y than others. It's just how it is. People are always going to do something that upsets you. It doesn't matter how nice of a person you are and those sorts of things. Someone's always going to do something. They're eventually going to do something that upsets, and you have to choose how you'll respond to that. You have to learn to forgive. Joseph's brothers didn't. They didn't. They instead just allowed that hatred to grow. They just allowed it to keep bothering them. They allowed it to keep infecting them and keep getting worse and worse until the day came where we read about that, where we started, that all of a sudden that hatred has reached a boiling point, and here they are in the field. No one is watching them, and here comes little brother wearing that coat again. And all of a sudden they see this way. Well, we can get away with this. Joseph's life goes from a major high to a major low, which in that, notice, going to his brothers was not Joseph's choice. He was just being obedient. It's not like Joseph came to the field wearing his coat of many colors to flaunt to his brothers, hey, look, here I am, the favorite. He's just doing what his dad told him to do. He wasn't there by his own choice. It was just being obedient. They see all of a sudden, here's this opportunity to get away with what we've been dreaming about. Joseph's life hits this major low. This guy who is the favorite and has been on kind of, again, this mountaintop type, is captured by his brothers, where he's cast into a pit, and they sit at the top of, they throw him in a pit where they then sit at the top of the pit and give me a little license here, eat their lunch discussing what to do with him. I think very often we read our Bibles and we skip over things. We read it so fast that we're kind of skipping over. That's what the Bible tells us that they did. Verse 24, they took him, cast him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water there. Verse 25, and they sat down to eat bread. You follow what they're doing there. All of a sudden, they've thrown him into a pit, and then they sit down to eat lunch at the top of the pit to discuss their options. Reuben being the most level-headed, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in a pit and leave him to die. Can you imagine for just a second here? Imagine Joseph's side here for a minute. You go to see your brothers. Again, not even of your own accord. You're doing this because your dad's told you to. You're going to see your brothers, and they capture you, throw you in a pit, and then sit around the top of this pit talking about what they're going to do to you next. That has to be a terrifying experience. That has to be a terrifying experience. He didn't know what they were going to do. He didn't know if they were going to kill him. He didn't know if they were going to leave him there to starve or die of the elements. He had no idea what was going to happen. And we know how it goes from there. We read it a minute ago. They end up selling him as a slave, where he goes to Egypt and serves as a slave, and then is falsely accused and thrown in prison, where he is forgotten. I think to define this section of Joseph's life as a low point might be an understatement. It just kept getting worse. But like they always do, low time ended. Which I think is something we often forget when we're in that low time, that they don't last forever. God does bring us through. And Joseph, once again, has a huge high. Back to that mountaintop. He's remembered in prison, interprets the king's dream, and is made to be second in command of the kingdom. And because of his position then, is able to save his family and his people from being wiped out by the famine. You want to talk about a roller coaster of a life? This guy had it. He knew what the top of the mountain looked like, and he knew what the lowest valley looked like. It's some major choices that he made along the way. And that's what I want us to focus in on this morning. 3 of those choices kind of throughout roller coaster of a life, if you will, that played some major effect in his life. And I know that we could view, or we could spend time on a lot more than 3 choices, but you're going to want to go home and eat lunch at some point, so we're not going to do that. We'll focus in on 3 of them. The first, Joseph chose to never give up. Joseph chose to never give up. Follow me here. Though at times it would have been the easiest thing to do. He chose to never give up. Even though there are stretches of this where giving up would have seemed like the thing that was just, this is what I have to do. When you have hard times, it feels like the easiest thing to do would just be to stop trying. Right. Just be to give up. You know, you can't see the end in sight. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're tired of the fight, and you're tired of the struggle, so you think, well, I'm just going to stop. You see people do that in all sorts of aspects of their lives. You see people do that in their jobs, that they're going through a difficult patch in their job, and they're struggling, and they give up and decide to move on. You see people do that in their marriages, that a lot of marriages simply, or that a lot of marriages that fail simply do so because, well, they thought marriage was just going to be fun, but it's work. Happily ever after is a lie. It really is. I love my wife. I don't mean this negative toward her at all. Please don't take it that way. I always worry when I tell stories like this, that someone's going to be like, he's a horrible person. No, I love my wife, so don't take this wrong. But opposites attract, and my wife and I very much are opposites in everything. On a day off where we have nothing to do, we joke about it often because she is one. If she's going to choose what we're doing for the day, it's always going to be to go to the beach, and we call it the hippie beaches, Whereas I'm going to go to the mountains, and she picks on my rustic mountains, and we're just opposites. If we have a day that I get to decide what we're doing, or she does, it's going to be opposite directions because opposites attract. So you put 2 people in the same house who are opposites, it isn't going to be happily ever after, because there's going to be days that you have to work to keep things going. And the reality is a lot of people hit those tough patches and stop. It's easier. You see that in people with their jobs and with their marriage. You see that with people with their kids. Raising kids is not easy. Raising kids to serve and love God is not easy. And so people will start off in it, and then, boy, this is a lot of work, and they stop. And we have it in all sorts of different areas of our life, examples that we could give, that it gets hard and we hit that low, and suddenly, well, we don't want to work at it anymore, and we give up. Joseph chose to never give up. May I remind you, though he didn't deserve to be there, in the bottom of the pit, Joseph didn't deserve to be there. He didn't deserve to be there. I know that there were things leading up to this, the telling his brother the dreams. Studying for this, I read a commentator who I fairly strongly disagreed with. His outlook on it was, well, Joseph was doing that to, act like a little brother and like prod at his big brothers, telling the dreams. He was just trying to get under their skin and aggravate them. I don't believe that's the case at all. Joseph did nothing to deserve to be at the bottom of this pit. Again, remember, he wasn't there on his own accord. Dad sent him. He was just being obedient. Sold into slavery. Joseph didn't deserve to be there. It wasn't by his doing. It wasn't a poor choice that he had made that got him there. He was there by someone else's doing. Enslaved at Potiphar's house. Joseph didn't deserve to be there. That wasn't on him. Thrown in prison. He didn't deserve to be there. He was falsely accused and thrown into prison for something he didn't even do. Most often when we're in a low spot, a valley of our life, it's because we made some sort of poor choice that put us there. We went out of God's will, or we chose to do something. That wasn't the case for Joseph. He wasn't in this place because of what he did. He didn't deserve to be there. He was in this place and chose not to give up, despite the fact he didn't deserve to be there. Chose not to give up, so what did he do? He worked hard and gave it his best. Turn over to just a couple of chapters, 39, verse 1 through 6. 39, verse 1 through 6 says, Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put in his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Now, again, let's think about this for a minute. Joseph wouldn't have had to have. He worked hard. He gave his best. He wouldn't have had to have. Joseph could have chosen to have a bad attitude in this whole thing, to be upset about the situation he was in, and it wasn't his fault anyways. I don't think any of us would have even faulted him had Joseph decided, hey, I don't deserve to be here, and I shouldn't be in Potiphar's house. I shouldn't be in Egypt. I shouldn't be a slave. I'm not working for this guy. I'm just going to sit down and complain about my situation. I mean, I don't think we could fault him, because often we do that sort of thing. I don't think we could have said anything negative about Joseph had he just said, you know what, this isn't right. I've been wronged. I refuse to help this guy. But that isn't what we see. That isn't what we see at all. Instead, what we see is that Joseph got up every morning and gave his best. Got up and worked and was blessed for it. And I know this point, I feel it's more practical than anything else. But I believe a lesson can be learned from Joseph when in a hard time, going through low times. Joseph chose not to give up, just to keep pressing on. Chose just to keep pushing forward for God. There's going to be low times in life. None of us like them, but they're there. We have to just keep pressing on. The second choice I want us to look at, Joseph chose to acknowledge God. Let's look at a few examples of that. Chapter 39, verse 1 through 5. We just read it. I'm not going to have us read it again right now because it was just a moment ago. That he chose to acknowledge God. Now, I know nowhere in 39, 1 through 5, I know nowhere in there does the verse say that Joseph specifically verbally acknowledges God for the fact that he was blessed. Nowhere in there does it say, Joseph told Potiphar, yeah, the reason I'm blessed is because of God. But let's look at this. Why do you think Potiphar saw that God was with Joseph? Why do you think he saw that? It's because he lived and acted in a way that pointed to God. The way that he lived in a hard time, the way that he lived showed others that God was active in his life. Despite being in a low spot and despite being in a bad place by no doing of his own, despite being torn from his family and torn from everything he knew, he lived in a way that showed people God. Again, think about that. When in the position that Joseph was, that's when people usually see our worst. When we're in that low time of life, or when we have problems all around us, and we feel like, man, I didn't deserve to be here, or this is worse than what I thought. That's normally when people see our worst. Instead, what they saw in Joseph was God. At his worst, his life pointed people to God. When my dad was with the Bible college, one of the things that we got to do, and I thought it was fun, the summers we got to travel with the singing groups. My dad would be the chaperone for one of the singing groups or something, so we'd spend all summer traveling around to the different churches while they were singing, and my dad would preach and so forth. one of those summers, one of the students taught a class. I think they were doing like a VBR or something like that, but one of the students taught a class, and he gave the example that when you squeeze an apple hard enough, what do you get? You get apple juice. When you squeeze an orange hard enough, what do you get? You get orange juice because that's what they're full of. And his example, and he's teaching this to kids, and so then he turned it to, and so when you squeeze a Christian, what do you get? And kids being kids, they all screamed out, blood and guts, which wasn't at all what he was going for. His reason for using this example was that as a Christian, we ought to be so full of God that when we're squeezed, Christ is what comes out. It's what came out of Joseph. He is, no doubt, his life is, he is getting squeezed in life. And what came out showed people Christ. What came out wasn't a bad attitude, wasn't anger, wasn't him being upset. It was Christ. I have to admit, that's a convicting thought. It's a convicting thought because I'm afraid that way too often, myself included, that when we get in that time of life where I'm getting squeezed by all the pressures and the problems and the everything else, that it isn't Jesus that always comes out. And I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in that. Joseph chose to acknowledge God through his actions at Potiphar's house. Joseph acknowledged God in the prison. Chapter 39 again, verse 20, if you will. Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. Skip down to 40, verse 7 and 8. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him in my dream, and it goes on from there. Well, we won't go into all the dreams, but here Joseph is in a spot in his life that you have to feel like things are just spiraling out of control. I mean, he went from living at home with your family where life is good to your brothers hating you and throwing you in a pit and then selling you as a slave. You become a slave in Egypt where you're falsely accused and thrown into prison. I don't know exactly how many years this spans from when he's thrown in the pit to where we find him in Genesis chapter 40. But it would have to feel like over those years, life is just spiraling out of control. That things just keep getting bad to worse. Have you ever had it where you feel like you take one step forward and two steps back? That's his life through this entire thing. That every time things are bad and they start to get a little brighter, and then he has another huge step backwards. And yet, when given the opportunity, he acknowledges God. In the prison, through the way he lives again, but also in his words. When it comes to the dreams that the men are worried about, they're worried about the dreams that they have, and he immediately brings up God. Joseph had options. Joseph could have ignored the men. Think about this. They're sad because they've had troubling dreams. You're in prison. Like, everything is troubling about that situation. Joseph could have chosen, look, we're all troubled right now. I'm going to ignore your problem. Your problem is not mine. I have my own troubles going on. We're in prison. I got thrown in here for something I didn't do, Just get over it. Deal with your own problem. It's not mine. He could have ignored it. He could have tried to take the credit himself. He didn't have to tell him that God's the one interpreting it. He could have just said it was him. He could have done any of that. Instead, he chose to point him to God. He acknowledged God in the prison. We see this again. He acknowledged God in the palace. If you look down at chapter 41, verse 14 through 16, Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. He shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand the dream to interpret it. Pharaoh here is willing to give him the credit. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Again, here is Joseph finally in a moment where it looks like things are moving forward and improving, and when the attention is pointed at him. Again, Pharaoh is saying, I've heard you're the man. You can do this. And immediately he deflects it off of him, and no, not me. God. Don't put this on me. I'm not the one who can do this. God is. Joseph acknowledged that everything he was and did, whether it was that mountaintop time or that low time, that everything he did was of God. And he gave God the credit for it. That was a choice that Joseph had to make in all of these cases. Again, he didn't have to give credit to God. Pharaoh is willing to give it to him. He could have, yep, I'm the one. I can do this for you. He didn't have to acknowledge God in every situation. He could have chosen to focus on self. He could have chosen to focus on how life wasn't fair. You know, people want to talk about life isn't fair. He sure had an argument in that. He could have chosen to focus on how this just isn't fair for me and I shouldn't be here anyways. What reason did Joseph have to help the Pharaoh in the first place? I mean, I mentioned that with the men in prison, that he could have just ignored them. Listen, it's not like the Pharaoh of Egypt is really the friend of the Israelites. He very easily could have said, yep, you've had a dream, and boy, it's a bad one. I'm not going to tell you what it means. He could have. Yeah, God revealed to me what it is. Good luck. He could have chosen to focus on himself and how it wasn't fair, how poorly he had been treated. Again, if anyone can in their life play the victim card, it would have been this man. But instead of focusing on himself, he pointed everything to God. That's a choice he made. It's a choice he made. Rather than focusing on myself, I'm going to look to him. It ties back in with the lesson from growth class of our outlook being on him. That's what he chose. Joseph chose not to give up. Joseph chose to acknowledge to God. And then thirdly this morning, Joseph chose to forgive. Turn over with me, if you will, chapter 45. I know it's jumping a little bit ahead, and I apologize for making you turn all over the place. But chapter 45, Genesis 45, 1 through 7. I said at the start, I think it helps us to kind of see some of this context a little bit. Verse 1 through 7, Then Joseph could not refrain himself. This is, his brothers are now in Egypt because of the famine, needing food. Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, Cause every man to go out from me, and there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brother, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in the which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Joseph chose to forgive. Joseph could have held a grudge. Had he been like most of us, would have spent those years when he's in the pit and sold to the Ishmaelites and sold to Potiphar and in prison, and even the years in Egypt. If he was like us, he would have spent those years dreaming on how he would get revenge someday. I mean, he has spent years getting treatment that he didn't deserve. He had spent time as a slave and as a prisoner, and it was all his brother's fault, and now here they stand needing you. He could have held a grudge. He could have sought revenge. Again, they're here not because they want to make amends. They're here because they need you. They're here because they're desperate. They have nothing, and they need you. What they meant for evil, God had used for good. And now here Joseph is with power and authority. He had the choice on if they get to take food home or not. He had the power. Realistically, we saw through this, and I know we didn't read it all right now, but he had the power to decide whether or not they even got to go back home. Had Joseph wanted, he could have got revenge. He could have made them go through all of the things that he did. He had the authority to do that. He's put as second in command only under the Pharaoh. Had he decided, hey, I want revenge, and here they stand in front of me, you're going to be sold as slaves, you're going to be thrown in prison, you're going to go through everything I have faced. He could have sought revenge. And again, I think, while it's not right, I think most people would have thought he was justified in it. I think his brothers expected it. Verse 3, when they figured out who he was, they couldn't answer because they were troubled. I'm pretty sure when he says, hey, I'm Joseph who you sold in slavery, his brothers are all standing there going, uh-oh, we are in trouble. They're probably all expecting, hey, he's going to put us through what he's had to face. He's going to throw us in prison. He's going to do, whatever it is. But instead of holding a grudge, instead of seeking revenge, he chose to forgive. He chose to forgive. He recognized that God had used this entire situation to put him in the place that he was. He said that multiple times in those verses in chapter 45. Multiple times that he mentions to his brothers that God brought me here. That these difficult situations were to bring me where I needed to be used of God. One of the men of our church and myself, actually a couple of them and myself, were talking this week and a half ago, and it came up. It came up in the conversation. You know how you sometimes look back at things and you think, "Boy, if I could go back, I would change that." If I could change this thing, or if I could avoid that in my life, I would. And we look back at those things, But here's the conversation ended in this way, in that while we all have those things, those are what made us who we are today. All of us have things that we look back at and think, boy, if I could do that again, I would have done it differently. I look back, I think I had a great childhood. I loved my childhood. My parents were fantastic. I know that's not true for everyone. I don't look back and have, those sorts of pains. And I get that's not the case for everyone, but we often will look back at those sorts of things that, boy, I would have done that differently if I could. Or we look at some painful experience in the past and we think, well, I wish I didn't have to go through that, or didn't have to go through that back then, and I wish I could do things differently now, and I would handle things differently. But what you've come through, and let me rephrase that, what God has brought you through is what made you who you are right now. And did you ever think that perhaps God brought you through it for a purpose? That's what Joseph recognized. That's what Joseph recognized, that, hey, yeah, I went through all of these difficult things, and God used it for such a time as this. God used it, as he puts it in verse 5, for God did send me before you to preserve life. You recognize, yeah, I went through some terrible things, and God used it to put me where I need to be to serve him now. Do you ever think I don't know everyone in here, maybe the horrible things you had to face to this point, that maybe God used them to put you in a place that he could use you now. But for that to happen, you have to choose to forgive. You have to choose to recognize that God brought you through it for a purpose, his purpose. There was a reason for it. And that's where we often get hung up. How could this terrible thing really have been of God? How could I have had to have faced this or had to have gone through this and it really be used of God? Again, Joseph had as much argument as anyone. How could me being sold into slavery, start off with how could me being thrown in a pit and my dad said I was murdered by an animal, how could that be of God? And how could me being sold into slavery be of God? And how could me being taken to Egypt be of God? And how could me being falsely accused and thrown into prison be of God? But it was. He recognized the choose that God brought him through it for his purpose, for his reason. So I want to kind of bring all this together this morning. Joseph went through some extremely hard times. There's no soft way to look at it. Joseph went through some extremely hard times, but he chose, despite them, not to give up. He just kept pushing on for God. He chose to acknowledge God in everything he did, and he chose to forgive and recognize it was all part of God's plan. Here's how I want to try to help us to apply this morning. We all go through, I said this earlier, we all go through low times in life. Nobody likes them. Everyone would love it if we could live our entire life on a mountaintop. Wouldn't that be awesome if your entire life everything went perfect? But that's not real. That's not real life. We all go through those valley moments of life. I don't know. Maybe there's some going through them now. Maybe someone in this room says, yeah, right now I am going through one of those times that I'm saying, how could God use this? Maybe it's something that happened in your past that you look back at and think, how is it possible that God could use this that I went through for him? But you have a choice. You have a choice. You have the choice to focus on yourself and sit down and whine and cry about what happened, or to keep pushing on for God. You have a choice to acknowledge God in everything. And you have the choice to hold a grudge or forgive. I've often wondered, when studying the life of Joseph, I've often wondered, in this Genesis 45, he tells his brothers 2 different times, tells them that God did this to put me in the place to save life. I have to wonder, and I tend to think not. I have to wonder if through all those years of slavery and prison, if Joseph was thinking, this is all part of God's plan. I'm sure, the Bible doesn't tell us, it doesn't show us that. I'm sure Joseph had days, just like we do, where he got up and thought, man, this is terrible. I'm sure he had days that he thought, why do I have to deal with this? But he just kept pushing on. He just kept serving God, just kept acknowledging God. He just kept forgiving and recognized by the end of it, this is all part of God's plan. This is all God using all of this to bring me where He needs me to be, so that I can serve Him. Let's make the choices we see in Joseph. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect at it. It doesn't mean there's not going to be days you wonder, why am I dealing with this? But let's make the choice to keep pushing on for God. Let's make the choice to acknowledge and to see God in everything. And rather than to hold a grudge as to why this happened, recognize it's all a part of His plan, His purpose for my life. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, I want to thank You for the simple fact that we can know that whatever it is we're dealing with, it's all a part of Your plan. So often we look at things happening in our life and things that that we're going through that, we don't understand. We don't know why we're facing this, why we have to go through this. We don't know why this is all going on, Lord. Thank you for the fact that I can know you're in control, that you still have a plan and you're still working your plan, and it's all a part of your purpose. Lord, help us to learn from Joseph, this example that we see in him, Lord, to keep pushing on for you, to acknowledge you in the way we live and in the things we say, to acknowledge you in everything, and to learn to forgive. Pray this all in your name. Amen. I don't know if you guys typically have an invitation at this time? Okay, I'm going to take liberty if that's okay. Let's take a minute and just stand with heads bowed and eyes closed. Again, I don't know normally how you guys do invitation, so I hope this is all right. But if we can just have the piano play for just a moment. I don't know how God may have spoken to you this morning. I think in looking at the life of Joseph, there are a ton of different things we can see. The example of his life. But I think those 3 points that we looked at this morning, the idea of continuing to push on. And like I said in the message, I don't know what everyone in here is going through today. For all I know, there's someone who maybe in their past or maybe right now have some things that, boy, this is a really hard thing I've had to go through. Let's keep pushing on for God. Let's make the choice today to acknowledge God in everything. That it's all a part of His plan and His purpose. I may not understand it and I may not like it, but it's all a part of His purpose and His plan. Let's today choose, hey, I'm going to choose to, rather than hold a grudge, to forgive. To learn to forgive for those things that have happened, for those times that someone has hurt me, and move on, recognize that it's all a part of God's plan for my life to bring me where He needs me to be. So we're going to take a few minutes or a few times through of this song on the piano, if you don't mind. And the Bible talks about today is the day. Let's this morning decide. I guess I'll just leave it at this. Let's this morning make a choice. You have a choice. Look at the choice of Joseph. Let's this morning make a choice. I'm going to keep pushing on for God. So we begin to play, or as we have the piano playing, the altar is open. You can pray where you're at. We'll just take a few moments, and then I'll turn the service over.
Thank you, Brother Caleb. It was great. It's great having you here. I think we have a gift for you. Got a gift for him, for you and your family, for coming and preaching for us. Well, you are dismissed. See you again tonight at 5:30.